It happens every election cycle.
Donald Trump, I think, has a harder ceiling.
If Castro had such a good night, I think Beto O'Rourke probably suffered some.
Arguing over whether a candidate or incumbent is good or bad is an age-old tradition in the political media and among party operatives. Typically, candidate strength is measured by fundraising or by the margin of a win or a loss. But that can fail to create an accurate picture. In the era of data, metrics, and models and political analysis, at least one question still remains. How do we quantify the strength of individual candidates? With some inspiration from baseball Sabermetrics, we figured out a way to answer that question with data. Before it's possible to analyze individual performance, however, we must establish a baseline for comparison. In other words, answer the question of what would happen to any candidate within that party. Inside Elections captures that baseline by accounting for all federal and state executive election results. The baseline calculates the trimmed mean. That's the average after throwing out the highest and the lowest results of each party's performance in partisan, contested statewide elections. The metric includes the 4 most recent general election cycles in order to prevent any single election from dominating. For example, Florida has a reputation for being a perennial battleground, and Republicans hold a slight baseline advantage over Democrats. The current Republican baseline advantage over Democrats is a little more than 50% to more than 46% of the vote. In other words, a typical Republican candidate running statewide in Florida should receive a little more than 50% of the vote, while a typical Democrat would receive almost 47%. Now we can evaluate individual performance. The second statistic, vote above replacement or VAR, measures the performance of a political candidate relative to the typical candidate from their party within the same state. It's a political version of baseball's wins above replacement, or WAR, which measures a player's value to a team compared to a replacement-level player. VAR calculates the difference between a candidate's votes in an election and the baseline performance for their party. Going back to Florida, Republican Governor Rick Scott received about 50% of the vote in the 2018 Senate race against Democrat Bill Nelson. Compare that to Florida's GOP baseline, and Scott's vote above replacement score is actually negative compared to how we expect a typical Republican to perform. So even though he won, his victory wasn't as remarkable considering Republicans won 4 out of 5 statewide offices that cycle. Even though Democrat Bill Nelson lost, he had the higher VAR score because he outperformed the Democratic baseline. We can also calculate a candidate's VAR from prior election cycles and allowing us to look at baseline over time and identify trends. For example, according to the baseline, GOP performance in Florida has dipped by 1% since 2014 when Scott ran for re-election. Meanwhile, Democratic performance in Florida has increased by 3% according to baseline. So even if you don't like baseball, we've got 2 new metrics to help you navigate the exciting world of political analysis.